Okay, let's go. Welcome. This is a paper 3 synoptic overview. I want to give you a brief introduction to paper 3 EDEXCEL A level. I am going to go through this in class, but I'm largely going to focus on what is paper 3 and then think about how we structure a style of question or questions that you've not looked at before, and that is the 18 and 24 markers. So, quick introduction to the paper. It is 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the breakdown of the paper, it follows the exact same structure. 4, 4, 4, 8, 8, 2 analysed questions. They're kind of like little mini essays. We'll discuss those in class at a later date. Then you have the important evaluate 18 and 24 mark questions. Now, those are longer essays based on the resource booklet and your own kind of synoptic knowledge, and I'll come to that in a second. Now, the 3 synoptic themes that I'm going to look at today and that are covered throughout the whole of the course is this idea of players, attitudes and actions, and future and uncertainties. Now, as you went through the spec, you've probably noticed, and we have mentioned in class many times, players, or maybe we've talked about, you'll have seen the symbol for futures or attitudes. Often you may have been engaging in it without directly knowing, but we need to make sure we're very aware of these key synoptic themes when we are doing this. The other important thing is that you are using the sources extensively, and I'll come and talk about that shortly as well. Effectively, you're going to be handed a paper with a resource booklet about an issue. It is unseen, it's a synoptic paper with those themes I just mentioned, based on only the compulsory content. So you are going to be only assessed on the paper 1 and paper 2 content that's core. So in the human, you're thinking about globalization and superpowers, and on the physical side of the course, you're thinking about tectonics and carbon and water. So 2 hours and 15 minutes, 70 marks, 20% of your A level, but you'll have already revised the content for paper 1 and paper 2. So it really is, it's the paper that students they always say to me afterwards, I really enjoyed that. It allowed me to just think about geography and indeed use my geography that I'd already learned. There's a little bit of geography skills in there, and I'll talk about that later as well. So 20% of your A level, a mixture of AO1, AO2, and AO3, but there you see it, the AO3, the importance of applying knowledge and understanding, analysing and evaluating geographical information. That's key, really key, especially when it's unfamiliar kind of content you're going to be looking at. As I said, there is a skills element, particularly at the very start normally of the paper, where you should bring a calculator, but again, don't worry, it's nothing that you won't have been challenged by in terms of your normal skills questions in paper 1, paper 2. So what is important about this paper? Often some students panic because they're aware that there is this 18 and 24 marker to come. But if you break it down and you look at how many marks you've got and how many minutes you've got, effectively you've got 135 minutes. Now, you can break it down in different ways than this. This is only suggested timings. But let's say you gave yourself 21 minutes reading and planning. And when I say planning, because it's really important to spend time engaging with every single source, extracting what you can from it based on some of the things I'm about to go on and say. So that reading and planning time is crucial in this paper. You need to feel that you understand the resource booklet. You understand what the issues are. You understand what each source is trying to tell you. So with that in mind, you're definitely going to spend kind of 21 minutes. Some people spend a little bit more. Some people spend a little less. I put some kind of timings up. If you adjust it slightly, spend 25 minutes reading, you effectively have 1.5 minutes a mark. If you spend 15, you have 1 minute 43 per mark. So you can adjust it as you see fit. But the timings I'm basing it on below is 21 minutes reading and planning, which gives you 7 minutes per 4-mark question, 13 minutes for each 8-mark question, and then here are the biggies. 29 minutes for your 18 marker and 38 minutes for the 24. Now, if we think about this, those last two questions effectively are 60% of the paper, and that's 60% of 20%. So those two questions are really crucial. Some students asked me before, should I just dive into those big questions at the end? I almost feel no. In fact, I think you shouldn't, because you'll spend your time reading and planning, getting used to the sources, and then the way the paper works, you're kind of taken through and guided to look at certain figures, certain sources for those 4 markers and the 8 markers. And then in the 18 marker, you're also directed to a section to look at for that one. And then the 24 marker, it always says, using any of the resources. So I almost feel like it builds up. And the more questions you do in that kind of style, you end up gaining more knowledge of the booklet. So jumping straight to a 24 marker, you won't feel it. You won't be attached to the geography yet. So I do urge you to kind of stick to your timings, yes. But I would take each question as it comes. That's only my suggestion. Other people might feel slightly different about it. So what are you going to be tested on then? It's not local. It's going to be broad. Whatever topic they choose is going to be international. It will involve a number of countries, which is where the kind of synopticity and some of these big themes that are in the course can be applied. It will be kind of woven in. It's not going to be that, oh, here is a section on globalization. It will be an issue where all those topics are kind of blended in, and that's for you to try and extract often. There might be some that are clearly, obviously linked to a certain topic, but some of them you might have to be thinking about it. Now, basically, there's a number of issues. It's quite straightforward. The topics you've looked at, a lot of the same content has come up, and there's those core topics, as I mentioned earlier, that you're going to have to be thinking about. But a lot of those core themes, the kind of players and attitudes and actions and futures and uncertainties, if you go back through the spec, and it's actually something we will do in class when we're doing a bit of revision for this paper, is that we will look through, and you may have already been doing this in your revision anyway, but there are certain parts of the spec where we're kind of directed to our synoptic thinking. And it might actually be quite useful to go back through, and we will do this as a bit of a task, to try and think, that section has got really interesting synoptic themes. I can make connections to other parts of the spec there. But the key things are, you should be aware and trying to blend into your 18 and 24 markers content that links, not necessarily to a spec point at all. It's all based on this resource pack. And yes, you could bring in a spec point and your own knowledge. But here I'm trying to get you to think about players, attitudes and actions, futures and uncertainties. Can you think about those 3 synoptic themes and blend them into each paragraph you're doing in those extended questions at the end of the paper? Now, I might refer to this idea of path, and maybe you should, as you're using your reading and planning time. Why don't you put at the top of your paper when you're doing your exam, path? Just immediately get you thinking, right, where are the players in this source? I'm looking at source 1, path. Okay, players, actions and attitudes. Is there anything I'd think about? Policies that have been chosen or management methods here that influence the attitudes or identity? Or is there political or religious views coming into play here? Is it TNCs, going back to players, who are looking for profit, and so on and so on. Then your F in path is futures and uncertainties. Now, I cannot stress enough, make sure that you are really being explicit throughout, and indeed in your conclusion at the very end of your 18 or 24 marker. Think about geographical futures. What route might they be taking? What route do you think they should be taking, depending on what the issue is? And really try and make some sort of judgment, some kind of choices that you make at the end that talk about the direction that the issue is going. So let's think about players first. Who are players? Now, during lesson time, I'll go through this in a lot more depth. I just want to give you a kind of introduction to, when you are thinking about each source as you're reading and planning. maybe when you're practicing these at home as well. Go through each source and think, who are the players? Identify the players. Who are they influencing over this issue? Why are they influencing it in the manner? Do some players have greater influence, and why? You know, there's one of the SAMs, I think, is on mining in Congo. You know, think about the TNCs. What role do they play? What is their relationship with the government? How is local government involved in this? Is there charities or pressure groups that have a view on maybe exploitation or child labour, whatever the issue might be? Really go through each source and extract information linked to players. I've put some information here as well. You can pause these. I'm going to go through this when we do this in lesson time anyway. The one little note there is that players is not to be confused with stakeholders. Now, if you're confused by that, I put in brackets there, stakeholders who may simply have an interest without decision-making responsibility or power. That's the difference. If you're ever confused by those two terms, effectively players have the decision-making responsibility or power, whereas a stakeholder is someone who may have an interest in an issue or a topic, but not necessarily the decision-making power. So lots of different players. They can be public, they can be private, they can be voluntary. So think about private sector. We're thinking TNCs, the big corporations that you've studied, particularly in the globalization topic, or superpowers. Public sector, we're thinking that maybe you have county councils, national councils. Maybe if it's the United Kingdom, you're thinking of the Scottish Parliament or Westminster. You know, think about the different players that might be involved. What about unions? If we're thinking about is there democracy, or is it a single party that are in control? Think about the decision making that might be made across both private and public sector. And then there's something we could think about, third sector players, which again you'll have came across, but maybe not have termed in this way before, but it could be quite a good way for doing an answer. NGOs I'm thinking about pressure groups like Greenpeace campaigning on environmental issues or social issues. NGO, you know, we're thinking about Oxfam and many of the others that you've looked at. Or maybe if we are thinking more kind of political, it's about these kind of important think tanks who are promoting, you know, specific ideas, whether it be economic policy or many other issues linked to political power. Now, I've put here, students have to engage with political decision-making. The issue, whatever the issue is in this paper, it's really important that you don't talk about kind of we or they or the country decided. You know, really engage with who those players are. It is you to really step up. Why did TNCs do this? Why are certain countries making the decisions that they made linked to the particular issue? Really begin thinking about it. The ability for you to link decisions to specific players is essential. I'll say that again. Your ability to link specific decisions to specific players is essential. Remember, feel free to pause any of these slides if you want to kind of extract any more of the ideas from it. So that's kind of players that I really focused a lot on there. And I want you to go through your resource booklet on the day of that paper 3 exam and extract those players. Attitudes and actions. I've already hinted at this a little bit, but what are the viewpoints of the decision makers and the stakeholders? Think SEEP. Think SEEP. It's always a good one. If in doubt, think SEEP. Social, economic, political issues. What are the kind of attitudes towards the environmental issues that might come from this? Or what are the attitudes of some groups about the social or indeed political issues that might come? How will this affect the economy? Again, obviously depending on the issues. And then the idea about actions. In order to achieve what they want, what are they doing about it? If it's a superpowers related source that you're handed, you know, are countries trying to join or leave certain bodies? I'm thinking NATO. There's definitely countries trying to join NATO at the moment, isn't there? Why are they doing that? What is the reason for that? You know, obviously depending on what the source is. You know, why are certain countries wanting to join or leave the European Union? You know, is that because they're trying to achieve something? This is obviously kind of closely linked with the idea of players, but it's really important that you understand why different players have different attitudes. So you should be trying to reflect their values when you're making a decision, depending on what the question is. It will be, you know, that beautiful evaluate. So you should be trying to bring in the different views and actions of the different players. Are they pro-globalization, anti-globalization, anti-climate change? Is the government, if you've identified them as a player, are they being quite anti-climate change? Maybe they have resources. You know, bring all these ideas in. You're a geographer. That's what you are. Think like a geographer. Remember that great phrase, think like a geographer. On that day, you need to think and breathe geography. Think about all these things that we're talking about at the moment. What about the media? Look at the source. You should be able to look at the source that you're handed. You know, is it a reliable source? Is it a particular media outlet that might have a particular views, or is the media outlet from a particular country? You'll always get in this paper 3 often the kind of where the source comes from or who's said something might be quite useful to kind of understand that media and even the more broad media view on it. Future and uncertainties. You know, what are the big questions that underpin this issue, whatever that issue might be? And then I want you to think, particularly in your conclusion, you know, what might this look like then for this particular topic that you're handed in paper 3? If you're concluding a big 24 marker, you know, what will this look like in 2050, 2100? How might the economies, think of that future thinking we did with superpowers. You know, that's always a great topic to future think, you know, the superpowers of the future. But maybe your issue, maybe you can bring in some of that, because that's what's key. And I'll come to this later when I'm telling you how to structure these questions. But what's really important is that, yes, you're kind of thinking, and yes, it might not be for sure. You're just saying the way things might influence this topic. But really importantly, please do make sure that you are bringing in just a sentence or two of your own knowledge. And that's when I was mentioning superpowers there. It is, you absolutely have to use the evidence from the sources. You must quote those sources, actually quote them. Figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 shows this, figure 4 shows that. But a sentence or two in each of your paragraphs that brings through your own superb knowledge from your kind of case studies or what you've been doing in lesson or beyond. That will always add that spice. So thinking about futures and uncertainties, you know, what route might they be taking or is suggested? Is it business as usual? Is it, if the topic's about energy, you know, is it sustainable? Can it continue? Or if it's just, you know, even if it's about an economy, it doesn't have to be energy. You know, is this strategy sustainable? Is there a suggestion of some sort of radical alternative, or can you think of one based on some of the work that you have been doing? Why might the outcome of the decision be uncertain? Is there some sort of kind of scientific, demographic, economic, political influences? You know, think SEEP. If in doubt, think SEEP. But yeah, there's other demographic issues or scientific issues too that you might be able to think of when it comes to futures and uncertainty. You know, get that future thinking in there in each paragraph and absolutely at the end. So that basically repeats what I just said there. Feel free to pause and kind of extract more from that. Throughout the specification, when they were making the specification way back when the spec was first launched, they started off with kind of key concepts that exist and continue throughout the whole spec. So all of these words below you will have encountered in the spec, and in many topics you will have kind of had that synoptic connection. You know, globalization is mentioned in, obviously, globalization, also in superpowers, also in water, also in the management of tectonic issues. You know, the globalization, there you go, that's just one theme that runs throughout the course. You know, can you, when you're synoptically thinking in your 18 and 24 markers, you know, try and bring in as many of these key concepts. You know, I challenge you, write all these concepts down and let's try and connect different parts of the spec up. That's a fantastic idea. Or indeed, learn these points, learn where they link in different parts of your spec, and try and get them into your paragraph. Maybe you want to write a number of them down at the start of the exam and just try and make sure you're feeding so many of these key concepts into your answer. Feel free to pause and have a little think about that. I've defined them here as well, so it might be worth pausing here if you want to try and get your head around all of these concepts. So what is expected of you? Now, I'm focusing in this session here because I want so much value of this exam, 60% is in these last two questions, these big evaluate monsters. Measure the value or success of something and provide a balanced and substantiated judgment. So you've got to review all this information and come to a conclusion. Strengths, weaknesses, alternatives, data, your ideas. This is what we're really, really wanting you to get your head around here. So it's always going to be there for you. When you go through the resource pack, there will always be a debate. Whatever the topic is, there's always going to be kind of clear issues and topic, a clear topic for you to be thinking about. You need to engage with it. And remember, evidence is key here. There's not going to be a correct answer, and I'll show you an example of a question once I've discussed how to structure both of these questions. But do give both sides. You're not taking a position, you're evaluating, so you're giving both sides. And then, yes, you can conclude with a very clear kind of, this is what I think is important, and this is what it might look like in the future if this route is taken, etc. Make full use of the resource booklet. As I've said, you can combine different sections of the resource booklet. If there's a good graph in section A and something that's said in section D that links, if it supports your point, brilliant. I'll come to that second. During your reading time, I genuinely think that's when you should be looking for ideas. Maybe you want to just quickly look at the 18 and 24 marker though, just so you've got it in your head. Then you're going through each source in your reading and planning time, and you're trying to apply, remember, path. Go back to your ideas, your players, your attitudes and actions, your futures and uncertainties. Maybe you want to kind of pull those ideas out and be thinking about the bigger evaluate question. So you're spending that time, that reading time. Now, importantly, and once I get to the showing you how to structure these, it's structured in order to help you kind of achieve these marks here. And as always, it's not about dumping knowledge. I really don't want you dumping all the knowledge you've learned in your course, or indeed just copying over the raw knowledge. That's not where you get the marks. The marks are really from applying your knowledge and understanding of the information you're given to kind of produce some sort of interpretation of it, supported by evidence. That's that AO2, that lovely AO2 content there. And then you're making connections and conclusions from the geographical idea. That's starting to bring that AO2. You're using the data, the quantitative and qualitative data and evidence that's provided, and indeed your own, to kind of make sense and make these judgments. That's the AO3 content too as well there. That applies to kind of both the 18 and 24, but worth noting, look at that AO2 and AO3 in the 24. 12 and 8. It's absolutely huge. Now, do feel free to pause and have a little look. But the really important bit for me is that you are engaging in the data and the evidence, and you really are making the connections. That's absolutely key. Those judgments that you make, but also how reliable is the data you're given. Now, that is really important for getting into those top levels. You're actually being critical of the evidence. Can you actually say, well, this is not reliable? Is there something about the year that the data was published, or who's published the data? What their view, why they're trying to push this agenda, going back to the attitudes we spoke about earlier. Be critical. That's the higher level 24 marker content that's going to get you those marks. Fully logical connections, relationships, that's that beautiful content there that's going to get you right up there into that level 4. Do feel free to pause this as I'm going through it. Now, the 18 marker, again, you can go back and look at some of the papers, but they tend to be, and the big difference is that the 18 marker directs you to a particular section. So for instance, it might say using section C, evaluate the view that, or evaluate whatever it may be. Whereas the 24 marker is broad. It will probably say, using all sections of the booklet. And in the resource booklet, section A, B, and C tends to be lots of background to the issue and the themes that we've mentioned. But section D tends to be really specifically down to an issue or a problem with a number of resources. But the 24 marker will, draw on all of it. Whereas you might find the 18 marker directs you only to section C. So here is now the important bit. Now, this is what I'm really interested in getting you to pause, think about. Now, that idea of 3 sides of A4 or 4 sides of A4, I'm only doing that because some people say to me, but how long is it? How long does that look like? I don't like engaging in length, to be quite honest, because different people have different size of writing and so on. But if you are really interested in thinking, am I doing enough? 3 sides of A4 with 4 paragraphs for your 18 marker, and kind of 4 sides of A4 with 6 paragraphs for your 24 is probably the kind of length that we're talking about. Now, I'm saying 3 or 4 sides based on if you have kind of average size writing. Obviously, that will be very different if your writing is only 4 or 5 words per line. But I think it's better to think about it in terms of paragraphs and arguments that you're making. So effectively, the 18 marker, you might want to follow a structure of for, against. Each of those paragraphs is kind of following what we might call P's, slightly different from what we've spoke about before. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And normally your kind of 12 and 20 markers, I talk about peel. But with these, I'm going to talk about P's, which is effectively make your point, explain that point, and then you're going to use evidence that must come from the resource booklet and directly quotes, figures from those. So that's point, explain, evidence that's coming directly from the resource booklet. And then you're providing some sort of analysis of that. Link it back to the command word, evaluate that evidence you have just provided. Can you link it then to another source? So you're kind of saying, yes, also figure 1 shows this, which kind of might back up your analysis. So that's point, explain, evidence, analysis that links back to the command word and kind of might bring in another piece of evidence there. And then finally, can you bring in a snippet of your own case study knowledge, if relevant? And when I say a snippet, I am talking about literally 1 sentence, maybe 2, but not any more than that. One of the biggest problems that I find when I'm marking these externally or indeed in school, this applies to both the 18 and the 24 marker. Some people get carried away with this idea of bringing in your own knowledge, and we end up getting a case study dump of some sort of case study. You'll see a paragraph on EasyJet or a paragraph on Disney or a paragraph on South China Sea. It's linked slightly, but we don't need you to just case study dump. It is literally a snippet of your own case study knowledge. That really is important for both the 18 and the 24 marker. So that is P's. Your point, explain, evidence must come directly from the resource booklet and directly quoted. Analysis, which links back to the command word and maybe brings in another figure or suggests why it's reliable or not. And then a snippet, the final S, of your own information maybe that might just help build on that. And then you're going to provide a conclusion, which again makes some sort of substantiated judgment as which side you are on and why. Justify your decision. Really important. I think this. And then you're thinking again, the path is the reasons why you think that. Players, actions and attitudes that you think are there. Futures, it's always a good one. I like when I see, some sort of future related comment there. So that's the kind of 18. Now the 24 marker is pretty much the same, except you really are drawing on sources from anywhere in that booklet. And I would almost say you're doing 4 against, 4 against, 4 against, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But it's PEEAS again, exactly what I just described, really important. And the conclusion, same again. So you can almost see that the 18 is, the 24 is just a kind of extended version of the 24 marker. Now, I would, though, not limit it to that at all, because I suggested earlier on that you should spend about 38 minutes on that 24 marker. But if you have more time, just keep extracting beautiful content from the sources, making your paragraphs even. I mean, you could go beyond that if you had time, but do make sure that you are planning and you're thinking about what you're going to write before you start to write. As I said, you've got time as long as you follow the suggested timing earlier on. But I hope that offers some clarity. I've got some more. Remember, as I said, these are just suggested structures and ideas. You can indeed verge away from it slightly if there is another point or something else you want to make. So, for instance, on this slide here, again, feel free to pause and indeed make notes or screenshot. You might want to do, maybe if you're doing an 18 marker and you think, there's another little twist to this, there's something else that I can bring in. Yeah, go for the 5 paragraph, and it's, each paragraph is really, it's kind of a discussion on the issue. You're saying figure 1 shows this, figure 2 might allow us to think in this way, but it's not as reliable because it comes from, you're really kind of just enjoy it, embrace the geography. You're going for it. And then I've suggested below, again, just a little bit more information on the 24 marker. I have said 6 discussion paragraphs, which is exactly what I said before. Some more ideas on how to structure on the right-hand side. I love this. Use multiple sources to support each point. Doing this will really help with those AO3 marks. Don't just have figure 1 shows this and base everything on a paragraph around that. No, really kind of think of that path. Does a different figure show you it from a different point of view, a different attitude towards the issue? Does another figure tell you a little bit about a different country, a different superpowers view on it? Or does figure 8, a graph showing you what's going to happen in 2100, does that tell us about how there's uncertainty over the future of it? Bring in multiple sources, use models, case studies, and ideas that you know about, that you've learned, in order to kind of back up. Remember, I said that snippet of knowledge, it could be theory, it could be something that you've learned. I love this bit at the bottom. When I said about the analysis thing, challenge the reliability of the sources. Yes, absolutely. What's not included? What have they selected? Was there a problem with the potential bias? That's really that top level paragraph. That brings, when we said the PEEAS, that analysis of reliability is brilliant. Ongoing evaluation as well. Judgment, that's what we want. We want judgment ongoing. So yeah, just to put it in the context of a question here. This is one that's readily available. It is one of the SAMs. Evaluate the view. This is the 24 marker, by the way. Evaluate the view that evaluate the view that developing countries have much to learn from Singapore. Very broad, very open. You've got a resource booklet that talks about great things that have happened to Singapore, the way it developed, issues it might still have. And here you can see, I've took this directly from the mark scheme. Every figure tells you something. Every figure offers you an insight into this issue. And that is why you can use multiple figures for each paragraph, because it might be connected. When you're reading and planning, try and extract, write a little sentence what each figure is showing you. What is that figure showing me? How is that useful? Where is the path? And I just want to show you then, in the context of a student example here, you're probably able to see on the top left here, this student has answered that question I just put up there for you, and they've said, you know, what they could learn, and they've actually kind of almost planned. I'm on the left hand side here. Can you see where they've numbered the figures that back up a certain argument that they're going to make? They've done a very brief little plan, but they've circled all the figures that they're going to use for each point. And then what I've done is I've screenshotted a paragraph from this student's response. And you can see from the top, they've mentioned from figure 1, then halfway down, figure 7 is another example of management, blah, blah, blah. Further down again, also shown in figure 7 and 9, they're talking about green space, natural resources there. So in this paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4 sources have been used. You can see they're also extracting directly from it. There's also a bit where they've brought in their own knowledge halfway down. So you can see the key thing for me is I want you to be explicit in those 18 and 24 markers. The key thing and difference from the 20 markers or the 12 markers is that it is really broad, open, but engaging directly with those sources for all of your paragraphs. I hope that's helpful. I can't wait to talk more about this during the lesson. And we're going to go through a number of these examples. I'm going to give you different examples. I've got 3 examples of this Singapore question, a good, a bad, and a ugly, or good, good, and very good. You can assess how good they've managed to apply some of these ideas that I've been discussing. So again, feel free to pause the video at any point if you enjoyed the content there about the structure. For me, this is what I want you to spend time doing. If you are a student, no matter where you are, whether you're a HSO student or you are somewhere else in the world, please do take the time to think carefully about how you're going to structure. Structure is key here. But if there's one big takeaway that you're going to take, is that you must use multiple sources, cross-reference the sources in every paragraph, and be as explicit. See figure 1, see figure 2, see figure 8, see figure 5. You know, really be explicit. Direct the examiner to the figures that you have directly engaged with. From me, Mr. C, it's an absolute pleasure as always. Take care, stay safe, and have fun. Most of all, good luck. Think like a geographer. Just embrace it. This paper is brilliant. I love it. Ciao, ciao. Thank you. Bye-bye.